Okay, ladies and gents, welcome back to a brand new video. Today in this video, I'm going to be discussing my design workflow as a Masters of Architecture student from starting my project to finishing it with a portfolio. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. And just before we dive into the video, can you please smash the thumbs up button and subscribe? That'd be much appreciated. So yes, in today's video, I'm going to be discussing my design workflow, my design process, from how I get from the start of my project, from the very beginning of beginning research, all the way to the end submitting a portfolio. So in this video, I'm going to break down every step into 7 steps that gets me from start to finish. And those 7 steps are research, brief, sketching, developing drawings into 3 dimensions, refining 3D models, finalizing models, and producing drawings. Okay, to begin, the first thing that I would do, step number 1 is research. And personally for me, I think this is probably the most important thing. Typically, the research would be directed by your studio topic. So typically I start with a pretty wide subject and I try and go more and more specific as I get through the research. That way I get a body of research that is well refined and developed into a specific field. And I can really get a good understanding on a certain topic that I want to dive into and develop into an architectural project. And the reason why I say that I think research is the most important thing within my project is because it gives you a reference and support for every single design decision that you make along the way. Whilst you're designing and developing a proposal, you can always refer back to your research that is always going to support your proposal. And if you've done a lot of research and the research is good enough and it's high quality research, you've got a lot to fall back onto. And typically I'll get a piece of tracing paper, a pen, and just write down as much research as possible through diagrams, through bubble maps, and just as much information that I can get down. Step number 2, the brief. So at university, obviously you will need a brief. You'll either create a brief yourself or the tutors or the studio will direct you in a certain direction with a brief. But typically at master's level, it's quite independent, so you will have to construct a brief yourself. And obviously you want to create a brief that is going to be expanding and developing on your body of research. You want to identify a problem or a challenge that you want to solve within your architectural proposal. And for some people, this could be a really straightforward task to produce the brief, or it could take a bit of time to work into something that you want to be interested in and that you find is a relevant problem to your research. Step numero 3, sketching. Personally for me, once again, this is a really important one, and it's not just about sketching, it's also about getting your thoughts and your ideas down onto paper. Personally for me, when I start a project, I find it really hard to get going because there's always so many things going on in my head following my research, and I'm not really sure what direction to go in or how to respond to the research. So typically what I do before I even start sketching or developing on any proposal, I will get a piece of tracing paper, get some pen, and just write down all of my thoughts and ideas from my head down onto paper so I can visually see what I'm thinking. And although this might take a bit of time to get those thoughts and ideas down onto paper, it will also save you a lot of time in the long run because you can refer back to this and understand how you want to respond to your research and really reflect on how you were thinking at that period of time. So getting these thoughts down onto the ideas might come in the form of sketching or just some doodling, might come in some diagrams, or it might just come in some text to indicate some things that I'm thinking about. Essentially, with me sketching and writing down my thoughts, I can begin to build on my initial research and find relevant avenues that utilize the research in response to the brief. So this might come in the forms of sketches, concept diagrams, process diagrams, bubble diagrams to identify relevant spaces that might be useful in response to the brief, orthographic diagrams that explore things in section, in plan, in elevation. But typically these are just doodles, these are quick sketches to get me thinking about the project. Obviously this is all down on paper, this is all in 2 dimensions, and it's important to take that next level and move into 3 dimensions, which leads me to step numero 4, and that is developing into 3 dimensions. So this would be either sketch models, massing models, or also digital models as well. And basically turning those diagrams into 3 dimensions. So if this is going to be physical models, there's obviously lots of different types of physical models that you could do. Typically they'd be quite sketchy models that are exploring concepts or theory, but also you can use models to explore context and understanding the site, the landscape, and how you want to respond to your site. Obviously turning these drawings into 3 dimensions is really important to start understanding scale, mass, you can start extruding space and start understanding how this is actually becoming an architectural proposal. And in turning these drawings into 3 dimensions, I usually work pretty heavily in a digital software such as Rhino or SketchUp. To turn these drawings into 3 dimensions, I would simply just be extruding, I'd be duplicating, rotating, breaking, splitting, clipping, basically just start visualizing some kind of architectural proposal in response to the sketches. Obviously this will start giving you an indication of scale, the size of your proposal, and what are the relevant spaces that you might require, figuring out what rooms are going to be bigger than others, the relationship between spaces. Obviously you guys understand this as architecture students, and this is obviously really important to visualize things in 3 dimensions. Task number 5, refining the 3D models. So once you've begun to model things, sketch model things physically and digitally, you obviously get an understanding of things in 3 dimensions, and obviously you're understanding your project's a little bit further, understanding if it's actually possible or how you're actually responding to your research and whether it's actually coming together as a project. And this is where you want to start refining the model, adding more detail, developing it further to become more of an architectural proposal. And usually if I'm working in Rhino, obviously if I'm working heavily in a software, the file size is going to get big, it's going to get heavy, and so it's going to slow down, it's going to start taking its time to load, etc. And so I tend to save a new file of my model probably every 2 weeks. So for example, for this project, I had 7 different models, which now when I could go back, I can actually see the development of the work, which is really useful to have. I would usually add enough detail so you can see spatial arrangements, you can see floor planes, you can start to see the roofs, the wall structures, the organization of the project, its relationship with the landscape, and also a bit of context as well. So I wouldn't go into massive detail because it's not necessarily required depending on your project. And because my project was a really big project, it pretty much took over the entire site, it would be silly for me to go into massive detail because it just wasn't relevant for my project. But if you're doing a project that is quite small and you want to go into massive detail, then obviously you can spend the time on that. Task number 6, finalizing the model. Here is when you want to start setting up the relevant views and being clever with how you're going to extract the relevant information. So setting up the views are obviously really key, so you can use them as a frame to add finer detail and understand whether you can add more detail in the model or in post-production. This way I can determine my time management and also how long things are going to take me, and also obviously the size of the models. And normally I'll spend a bit of time testing and trialing out how I'm going to extract drawings from the model to make sure that I'm doing them as efficiently and as smooth as possible, and making sure that it's coming out how I want them to come out for my drawings. Because at the end of the day, the entire reason why you are producing a digital model is to extract the information for your portfolio and to produce the drawings. You're using a digital model to create floor plans, sections, elevations, visuals, obviously lots of different types of views and different types of drawings, diagrams, etc. And so you want to make sure you're setting up the model in a way that you can extract the relevant drawings as easily and as efficient as possible. And the final step of my workflow is number 7, and that is producing the drawings. So I'm going to just go step by step on how I would extract a drawing from my Rhino model and clean it up and make it look all pretty for a portfolio. In this process, I would use Rhino, Illustrator, Enscape, Photoshop, and then InDesign to finally produce my portfolio. So to begin with, probably the most important thing when I'm producing a Rhino model is making sure that things are on layers or assigned to layers so that I can easily navigate myself through the model. So as you can see here, what I've got set up, I've got too many layers, it's a bit messy at the moment, but basically I've got a landscape design layer which switches that on and off. I've got a design layer which I'm selected, so if I do that I could turn that on and off, and I've assigned different colors to it. So when I'm working in shaded, which is this setting here, you can clearly see the different components. So you've got the landscape components, you then got the design components, you've got the roof components which are on in red, which I can turn on and off. So once the layers are all set up, I would then set up a view. So as you can see here on the right hand side, I've got lots and lots of views for this project, and it's obviously good to set up all of these views. However, you'll notice that it will slow down the model if you have lots of views set up. So be careful of that. And for example, I'm going to turn this view here into a drawing. So what I would do is simply highlight everything in view, and then I would type in make 2D. So what the make 2D basically does is just makes it into 2 dimensions, fairly straightforward. And it basically just flattens the image down into lines. So here you can see this is the make 2D, but one thing that does happen when you do a make 2D is you get a lot of lines that you probably don't want. So for like this, for example, like these here, which weren't there before. And so basically what I do is I just go through and delete all the lines that I don't want, and basically just clear up the drawing, clean it up. And what I would normally do is ungroup it. I would then go into here, so select the pink, select the color, and then change that layer back to the original layer that I wanted. So basically when it does the make 2D, I'm pretty sure this is a setting that I could probably change, but usually when I do it, I have to change it back to, so if you right click on the layer that you want it to be on, right click it and just do change object layer, and that'll basically change all of the objects to the relevant layers that you want. And you can spend a bit of time going through cleaning it up. For example here, like these little bits here, you don't want all this everywhere, and it takes a bit of time to clean it up. Then once you've spent some time cleaning it up and making all of the correct layers, so as you can see here, this is all of the layers that I wanted. So I would normally apply the layers to the objects where I want to basically have this specific line weight. So for example, the purple will be the finest line weight, the red will be then the next finest line weight. And so basically what I'm doing is I'm setting up these layers, so when it comes to putting it into Illustrator, it's very easy to go in and change the line weights. And I can basically just select the color and change the line weights that way, rather than going through obviously all the individual lines and objects and change it that way, because that would just take a lot of time. So I would normally kind of set myself up in Rhino to make it a lot easier and smoother in Illustrator for changing the line weights. So to export it, I would simply highlight what I want, type in export, and export it as a DWG, so AutoCAD drawing, save it as whatever I want, and then basically open it in Illustrator. Okay, so now that's opened up in Illustrator. As you can see here, you've got the colors and you've got all the layers here assigned on the right hand side. So what you can basically just go and do, this is the easy bit, this is the fun bit. You select the layer and then you change the line weights. So for example, if we make this 0.1, change it to black, we can then go into the back bit, which we want as being the finest. We could do 0.06 and change that to black. We can then do the design, which in this case would be the strongest of the line weights, so we could do 0.15. Then the roofs, which are probably the second heaviest, so we'll do this 0.12. There you go, there you've got the different line weights. As you can see here, the thinnest, and then they get thicker. And obviously in this you can spend a bit of time making sure the line weights are all correct. Make sure you clean up the drawings, and I would normally spend a lot of time cleaning up the drawings here and making them as crisp as I possibly can. And a lot of the time I would actually do 2 drawings at the same time. So if I was doing a page of landscape drawings, for example, I would do them both at the same time, so that it makes it a little bit quicker for me to basically select the layers and change the line weights, etc. And I can kind of fly through it that way. So as you can see here, I've got the 2 landscape views side by side, so I can work on them together. It makes it a little bit quicker and easier, so I can make sure that obviously all the line weights are correct and they all kind of follow suit with both the drawings. And then that would be basically the line work done for the drawings. So obviously people have got their own preferences and styles when it comes to drawings. Personally for me, I like the line weight drawings with a bit of shadow. And so what I'm going to do now is go back into Rhino, open Enscape, which is a plugin for Rhino, and get some really nice shadows that I can add to these drawings. So in Enscape, you can simply click on the views that you have set up in Rhino, and it will basically position you there in the model. And you can change the environment, the shadows, the direction of the sun, and also you can put it on a white mode like this, for example, which simply just shows the shadow and the white of the model. And basically I would then use this to add some depth into the drawing. So I would show you exactly how I produce this, but for some reason my Enscape isn't opening, so I'm just gonna have to show you the render that I produced. But as you can see here, you can add a grass texture, you can add any texture that you want to make it look really realistic, but in this case all I want is the white with the shadow. And what I would do is I'd open it up into Photoshop and just begin to play with the levels, the exposure, and basically just getting it to the kind of style that I want for my drawing. So what I would do is go to image adjustments and exposure, change the level of the exposure to basically determine how much shadow I want or how much kind of detail with the grays I want in these areas. So if I do that, I can then change the levels to make the shadows a bit more prominent, a little bit darker. And I'd basically just play around with this until I kind of get it to how I want it to look. I would then basically set up the line drawings in Photoshop. So this is going to be a portfolio page where I have basically 2 line drawings side by side, and then you can add in the render. So here I've lined up the render perfectly with the line drawing and adjusted the kind of levels and everything. And then what I'm going to do is change the opacity to maybe 80% so it's not so kind of prominent. So I'm going to do that on both of them. And there you've got a line drawing with the shadows, and it looks fairly clean. But obviously that's not the final product. There's obviously another layer of information that you need to add. So I would then go and add people. I would then add vegetation to bring the drawing a bit more life, because it is a landscape at the end of the day. So if you add people and vegetation like this, I could then maybe add some red in here to bring this to life a little bit. Then maybe play with the sky, so add in a line work sky and play with layer options. So if I do subtract, I quite like the dark sky, and I can do that on both of them. And then I can add other things such as clouds, so just a really subtle cloud like so. Add birds, and yeah, add other details like framing, maybe a red rectangle around the edge. And that is pretty much how I would produce a drawing from start to finish. And this is the kind of style that I went for throughout my first year Masters of Architecture portfolio. And I've also added a bit of a grain to the drawing as well, because this is about film and I wanted to add that kind of film grain. And yeah, that is the process that I go through. It is fairly straightforward. It starts with modeling something in significant detail in Rhino, making it 2D, cleaning up that drawing, exporting it into Illustrator, cleaning it up once again and adding the line weights, then getting the shadows from Enscape, layering the line weight and the shadows over the top of each other in Photoshop, and then adding more details such as people, vegetation, clouds, a sky and birds, for example. And from start to finish, that is how I would produce a drawing. And obviously I would repeat that throughout my entire portfolio. Depending on the different types of drawings would obviously require a different level of detail, or different types of shadows, or different colors or vegetation to add. But typically when I'm going for my portfolio, that would be the process that I would do in producing the drawings. So yeah, I hope you guys found that interesting and got a good insight into my workflow. Obviously I've tried to keep it as brief as possible to try and make sure this video isn't going to be going on forever, because I could probably do like an hour, 2-hour video talking about the details and the intricacies of my workflow. But essentially today you got an overview in my workflow. So thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please smash the thumbs up button. That'd be much appreciated. Make sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I will see you next time. Peace.